Ukraine today is nothing else as an American colony, and he can't make decisions of his own. He depends on the one hand, from American and EU money and money of the International Monetary Fund, on one hand, and on the other hand, he's surrounded by Ukraine Nazis. This is his problem. He cannot make decisions of his own. And concerning Crimea, Crimea was given in the USSR by Khrushchev to the Soviet Republic of Ukraine in 1954. People were not asked. When the USSR came to an end in 1991, the Crimea was the first region to make a referendum and to apply to be independent inside the USSR. And after the coup in Moscow in mid-91, so a small minority decided to come to a separate state to Ukraine, but a majority of Crimean people wanted always to get back to Russia. This was a problem. There was a contract of stationing 25 million militants because the Russians have a marine base on Crimea. And after this, according to this treaty between Moscow and Kiev, it is possible that Russian troops secure important places of the whole island. And they did in 2014, nothing else. It was a free referendum without using of force or something else. It was a free referendum.
So what do you say to those in the West that just dismissed that referendum, saying it was just like a kangaroo court kind of situation where it wasn't real, they were told what they had to do, etc.? What do you say to that charge?
Absolutely not. So I saw many, I talked to many people in Crimea, and I talked to many people in the Donbass, in Cherson, and in Zaporozhye. And all people, without any exception, told me, we wanted to vote. We wanted to vote. We were not under pressure. We wanted to get back to the Russian Federation because the Russian Federation is the only power who can guarantee peace. We were under fire by the Ukrainian military for 8 years. Now let's go to the Russian side. There is peace. That's the point. And nobody wants to believe that because it is against Western interest. That's the point.
It's against Western narratives.
Yeah.
And I want to now shift gears a little bit to it's not just Zelensky, it's not just Ukraine, but it's also Europe that's very much detached, in my view, from observable reality in anything that can be defended. And I think that there's something, a couple of different viewpoints happened here in just the last couple of weeks that I think really highlight how Europe is viewing things and how Russia is viewing things, and therefore how the United States seems to be approaching with this current administration, quite in contrast to the previous one. First of all, there has been attacks on civilian infrastructure on both sides of the line for various points throughout this entire war. One side decries it, one side said, "Oh, that's not what it was," etc. But there were two in particular here in the last couple of weeks. One in Odessa or near Odessa, and another one in Sumy that got the comments from both a European side and from the Russian side. So because they both addressed it, I want to show you the vast difference between how the same events are interpreted. First of all, let's go to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
Only this weekend, Russia attacked residential buildings and a hospital here with kamikaze drones. And today we both visited a hospital where we talked with some of the people injured in the war. Just 2 days ago in Sumy, on Palm Sunday, the holiest day in the Christian calendar, 2 Russian ballistic missiles killed over 30 civilians, men, women, children. Over 100 were injured, many seriously. This is simply outrageous. It's part of a terrible pattern of Russia attacking civilian targets and infrastructure across Ukraine.
So from the Western side, this is part of a pattern of an evil and wicked Russia that is devoid of humanity, that is not even shooting military targets. They're just going after people and civilians and hospitals and schools. They just want to create terror. That's what is being claimed. Then on the other side of that line, we have Vladimir Putin, who very calmly addressed that as well.
As for the proposal not to strike civilian infrastructure targets, that needs to be looked into. Well, for example, everyone is well aware of the strike by our armed forces on the Congress Center, I believe, of Sumy University. Is that a civilian object or not? It's a civilian one. But an award ceremony was taking place there for those who committed crimes in the Kursk region, both units of the armed forces of Ukraine and nationalists. But the regime uses these civilian objects. Or take a recent example, just a few days ago, in the Odessa region, a strike was carried out by our armed forces. It was a small settlement in the Odessa region, 82 kilometers, I believe, from Odessa. And what kind of object was that? An agricultural facility, hangars of an agricultural enterprise. But the Kiev authorities, together with foreign handlers and assistants, organized or tried to organize not only the production, but also the testing of a new missile system there. That is where the strike was delivered. So is that a civilian object or not? Civilian.
So you have Putin saying, yeah, we struck those things, but it wasn't because they were civilian. It was because they were military operations there. Now, you could get into a situation where, say, he said, she said, and the one claims this or the other. But I can tell you, just a few days ago, I had a comment from a British citizen who was on the ground in Sumy, who confirmed, just days before this, by the way, who absolutely confirmed to me that, yes, there were military. And they say that is a routine thing where the Ukraine side will put military in all kinds of civilian places to try and use it as a shield. So I have independent confirmation of that. But I just want your view on the disparity between how the same events are viewed on both sides in relation to, can we reach an end to this war?
So I was not on the ground in Sumy. And I want to say, body count don't bring back to life anybody. But I talked to many people in the completely destroyed Mariupol in September 2022. And some people told me that the Ukrainian army, the defenders of the city, brought in tanks and military personnel into civilian areas to get human shields against the Russian attackers. And so these neighborhoods got completely destroyed because it was a military goal. It got a military goal. And I heard from many people that in a steel factory in the north of the city of Mariupol, the Ilyich steel factory, there were positioned Ukrainian snipers, and they fired on civilians who tried to flee the city. And they want to force them to stay in the city as human shields against the Russian military. So it is completely not unusual that Ukrainian military is using civilians and civilian buildings for military purposes.
But so then the question comes, if they're still defending that and still pretending, and one has to, just acknowledge that for statements like that to be made, they know, Mark Rutte knows that it's being used as military facilities. So they're intentionally just trying to tarnish the Russian side. But it's one thing if it's just like, okay, that's the enemy. That's the side that the U.S. or the Western side is supporting against. So, okay, fine, they tar the enemy. But here's the problem. In doing so, to tar the enemy, that is so that they can keep the war going as opposed to seeking an end. And I think that is the real pernicious issue that's right now it's facing, because that kind of mentality and claim is preventing the war from coming to an end? How do you see it?
Well, I think the Trump administration is going the single right way. They try to find a compromise, and Putin won the war in Ukraine. That means the West has to meet Putin's proposals and Putin's demands. This is the only way you have. And the Europeans refuse to do that. They want to continue the war over the next 4 years, hoping that there will then another American administration, a democratic administration, to go on with the war. And that's the split in NATO. And so the Ukraine, from the perspective of the people, has only the chance to stop the war now, which is a hard piece, because they will lose 20% to 25, probably 30% of the country. But, well, the decision is not to lose this part of the country or to get it back. The decision is to lose this part of the country or to lose much more, and the country will get completely destroyed. This is the decision. So, and there is a lot of cynicism on the European side. No single peace initiative from the German side, no single peace initiative from the EU side. And now we have a situation that Hungary, Viktor Orban, is thinking about leaving the EU. And I think the European Union will be destroyed in 10 years. There will be no Union in the form we see today.
Economically and diplomatically, I assume you mean.
Because the Europeans, Trump wants to Europeanize the war. They want to bring the cost of the war to the European Union. And the Europeans cannot pay that. It's impossible because the costs are so high, more than $100 billion. And this is impossible to pay that for Germany and for France and for Italy. So Trump will the European Union force to include the rest of Ukraine. And then the Europeans have to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and they have to pay the cost of the war. And this is a bad deal. And everybody who is clear in his brain as a politician will leave this organization.
Yeah, and you can see where there's not a lot of thinking about what comes next for this. And you actually said a version of that in a recent podcast I saw, where you said the EU elite wants to hide in their basement to try to outlast the Trump administration, hoping for this democratic, follow-on, et cetera. But how can someone who has a brain in their skull say that the Ukraine side can survive another 4 years? You just mentioned that this $100 billion, that's probably for maybe a year plus of operations, not 4 years, not 3.5 years or so. So what mentality, what thought process can the Western Europeans have that's related in any way to reality, think that they can stay in the basement that long?
From my point of view, a lot of European politicians made their careers and are educated in transatlantic propaganda organizations like German Marshall Fund or Transatlantic Bridge, or the many funds and organizations of George Soros, for example. And they made their careers inside those organizations. They got grants and invitations to meetings, and they were promoted. And now we have a generation of politicians who are completely transatlantic corrupted. They were linked with their own biography and their own careers to the democratic deep state in the United States. And they won't believe that this business model comes to an end. Because this means those politicians will come to an end. And they played the war card all the time. And now the war cost come in. And they have to explain their own people that they will lose social security, they will lose investments in infrastructure, that there will come a big, social cuttings into the EU, especially into Germany. And though those people won't get elected anymore. And that's the problem they have. So, and that's the reason why the upcoming German government will decided to make debt of 500 billion euros. They are buying time for the next 4 years before the whole thing will break down.
Well, I will argue that that may be a theory, but I don't know that the reality on the ground will facilitate that extension by this long, because from many sources that I've got access to, and just from my own military experience, my combat experience, my study of the art of warfare, especially in Europe, I'm actually pretty confident that the Ukraine army per se, as a force, cannot last much longer than even later into this year. There's, in my view, no chance, because of personnel losses, anything else, that they can go on to facilitate that. And that leads to something that has happened before in the past in your own country. And I wonder if you could just kind of, I guess, just talk about this from your own historical perspective and your current dynamics and observation in Europe. Because let's say in January 1945, and actually long before that, it was absolutely unambiguously clear militarily Germany would lose the war. There was no chance that they could even stop the Soviet Union as they were rolling to the West. And so the opportunity was, all right, well, let's have an end of peace or negotiation settlement with this. Let's just end the fighting here because we can't win. Something like what happened in World War I, where they had an armistice and they just agreed to stop fighting before they lost any more, etc. But they didn't, and instead, as we all know, of course, Hitler continued to fight from his bunker until they literally found the chancellor, etc. To me, it seems like there's a similar dynamic playing out right now, to where there is not just with one guy with Adolf Hitler, but this whole elite class that seems to think that they can get to another 4 years, that they can just not agree with whatever Trump is saying, and that they can just continue the war indefinitely. How do you see that dynamic?
I think European today is run by crazy gamblers and not by realistic politicians. This is completely crazy. We have to stop the war now to save life of Ukrainian people, but European leaders want to fight until the last Ukrainian. And I think this is a mistake. Then the day will come up when they have to explain their own people in Germany, in France, in Great Britain, who started, in fact, the war. Why did the war last so long? Why did the West orchestrate the coup on Maidan in 2014? Why did the West stop the negotiations in spring 2022 against the will of the Ukrainian government? That's completely crazy. And though this generation of politicians is completely responsible, these people have to be brought to court. And that's the point. They don't want to get imprisoned, but they have to.
Yeah, it will. Of course, who's going to, because they are also in charge of the judiciary in their various countries, who's going to do that until I think that there is a collapse or a crash that affects these countries. And then what you say there, who knows, maybe that does happen. In the remaining time we have here, I wonder if you can tell me, based on all of this stuff and all these foundations, you've been talking about it going all the way back to 2013, quite frankly, where do you see this going if Trump does what he says and later this week says, I wash my hands, I'm moving on? What will Europe do then?
So I have to say, I have an American friend, Professor Robert Harkavy, and we co-authored a book on secret services. And he always said to me, the day will come when you as well are on the Trump side. And now the day came and I'm on the Trump side. I think Trump is doing the right thing in Ukraine. And this is the 7-point plan. It's the only plan to come to an end of this war and to find a peaceful solution. And it is very clear Crimea will stay a part of the Russian Federation. It is very clear you have to meet Putin's demands, and the 4 oblasts will get part of the Russian Federation, possibly not recognized by international law. It is clear we needed a ceasefire, and we need direct negotiations between the United States, between the Ukraine side and the Moscow side. I think the nuclear power plants must come under American control. So this is the only way to avoid that Ukraine paramilitaries will produce a dirty bomb to create chaos. So it must get under American control. And I think the Kremlin will agree that. And I think the Ukraine, this is very hard, have to sign a mineral deal. It is better to sign a mineral deal with the Trump administration as to sign a mineral deal with the EU. And I think the Kremlin won't accept, absolutely not, European peace troops in Ukraine, because this is a Trojan horse from the perspective of the Kremlin. So the Trump way is the only possible way, and I hope the Trump administration have enough power to bring the European politicians and the Ukraine under pressure.
Well, we'll certainly see, and we could literally see within days, because that statement by Vance was made just hours ago, and it was pretty authoritative and declarative that we're ready to just wash our hands of this if they don't agree with this, what he said was a fair deal for all sides. That's in the eye of the beholder, I guess, but at some point, maybe the reality is going to have to sink in, and the Europeans, if they see that they're on their own, they can't live in a basement for 4 years, while they're footing all the bills. So we'll see how this works out, but we are very, very grateful for having you on today, and hope we can have you back on again soon to assess more of these issues.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also thank you guys for joining us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't, by the way. That helps us out more than you may think. And to let you know, here in a little over an hour, we have Professor Mearsheimer is going to come in, and he's going to be looking at some more detailed issues here that we've been talking a little bit about, that Zelensky doubles down on Crimea is Ukraine, and there's nothing to talk about. Well, maybe there is, and maybe there isn't. We'll see what John Mearsheimer has to say about that. He's always got some good things to say. But tune in about an hour, when we'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.